It's time to live life through the eyes of fit people so that you too can live a fit life yourself. This is Fit Because. I'm one of your hosts, Jennifer Zerling, but you can call me Jay-Z. I'm a fitness and age management expert, author, speaker, as well as an international health advocate.
And I'm your other host, George Veater. I'm an entrepreneur, cattle rancher, fitness enthusiast, and a 6-time rodeo champion who has a huge amount of knowledge to share with you in the area of self-improvement.
Oh, he does. Get ready to learn how to bridge the gap between knowing what to do and doing what it takes to become physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, and financially fit.
You ready, Jay-Z?
Oh, I'm ready, George.
Let's dive in.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Fit Because Show. I am Jay-Z. I got George Veater here to my right, and we have an amazing episode today with somebody that I have known now for 8 years. Time flies when you're having fun. And let me just tell you a little bit of a backdrop before we head into that. I was working for a company called Cenogenics, which is an age management medical institute, phenomenal, located in Las Vegas, their corporate headquarters. And I ran the Beverly Hills facility with doctors there. And when I was training, which was a week long, I encountered this amazing physician who I'll never, ever forget. I was sitting at the computer with one of the nutrition counselors and saying, man, that patient looks great. Look at his abs. I mean, look at this. And here comes Dr. Jeffrey Leake and says, you want to see abs? Come to my office, and pulls up this huge picture of himself on his computer, shredded to the science. And I'm like, dang. Okay, so that gentleman, that amazing physician, is joining us today. His name is Dr. Jeffrey Leake, and I'm beyond honored that you have agreed to come on our show. And I know that you're going to be a wealth of knowledge. So please tell our audience who you are and how you got into age management medicine.
Okay, well, I was a board-certified anesthesiologist. I worked up in the Pacific Northwest in a practice for 27 years. I'd always been interested in health and nutrition. I was a college athlete. I played lacrosse at Ohio State University in the 70s and tried to stay fit and active throughout my medical training. I got a little more serious when I finally got out of residency and said I'm going to commit to taking care of myself. I never really gave up the self-image of myself as an athlete. So I tried to continue to exercise and eat right. I've always been active. When I was in my late 40s, I suffered an infarction of my pituitary gland. I had a tumor destroy it. And after they made the diagnosis, of course, I went to an endocrinologist. And they worked me up, saw that I wasn't going to just keel over and die immediately. So it was kind of like, well, go away and come back when you're broke, because I was still fairly healthy and fit. But I felt like, I thought that a pituitary gland was kind of important. So I knew about Cenogenics, and I came down as a patient originally. So I liked what they were about, their focus on nutrition and exercise. And I just decided to enroll as a patient, saw that they did some physician training, came down and did that just for grins. Years before, I'd certified as a personal trainer, again, just more for my own interest. And saw that eventually that they had an opening and decided to pack up the family and move to Las Vegas and try a whole new thing. So that was 10 years ago and still going strong.
That's awesome. That is awesome. Well, Dr. Leake, so tell us a little bit about your typical client, who that you work with or who you attract in your practice, and what from the outset you're trying to accomplish with your typical client.
Well, my typical patient is probably a 50-year-old male, plus or minus 10 years of age. Generally successful in terms of, they're doctors, lawyers, dentists, entrepreneurs, and we design executive health programs focusing mainly on nutrition and exercise. We do hormone management. About 30% of my patients are females. Most of them are generally attached to a male that's in my practice, a significant other or a spouse. Generally speaking, we're shifted a little more towards a more healthier clientele. We do have patients that have comorbidities, but they're not quite as advanced. Nothing like was in my anesthesia practice up in the Northwest, where I was really dealing with people who were quite ill. That being said, we do see a lot of early problems, and our approach is to try to identify problems early, assess, and then mainly through nutrition and exercise, try to reverse problems that are occurring. We see a lot of what you might have heard the term metabolic syndrome. It's a very typical problem in the U.S. We see a lot of that, and our program, frankly, is tailor-made to fixing metabolic syndrome.
For those who don't know what metabolic syndrome is, do you want to kind of hit upon that?
Well, metabolic syndrome or syndrome X is just a constellation of things like problems with cholesterol, dyslipidemia, insulin resistance or prediabetes or diabetes, large waist circumference, hypertension. There's usually a clustering of these things in patients who have, 1, 2, or 3, and they just call that metabolic syndrome. It's a catch-all phrase. It doesn't. It has no utility in terms of telling you anything different about each individual domain. You treat those domains separately, but they're just a commonality that a lot of patients have.
Maybe talk about what age management is, Dr. Leake, because, there's a lot of social influencers out there who's spreading quote unquote fake information on how to age well. And I really think you guys are the pioneers of age management medicine. I had the honor of working for this company for several years. And, I learned a lot of what I know with nutritional sciences as well as, exercise, because we do a lot of exercise testing and whatnot. So share with people what people should do if they really and truly want to dive into a healthy age management plan.
Well, we call it age management, and frankly, it's a lack of a better term. We don't like the term anti-aging because that implies that you can actually prevent aging, and the reality is you cannot. However, you can significantly attenuate the rate that it occurs. Again, the main way you're going to address that is by having a sophisticated and proper way of addressing your nutrition, and then exercise. The hormone management does play a role. The way I like to explain it to my patients, if you think of nutrition as your charcoal, exercise as your match, you can build a fire and cook up a great recipe for health and wellness with those two things. And I think all of us in the industry, we know that, and that's what we focus on. Where the hormones would come in, you can sort of think of the hormones. If we optimize those, that's going to be like giving the patient a can of lighter fluid. It's a catalyst, an accelerator. It augments the ability to take advantage of what you're doing nutritionally and exercise. Generally, a lot of times patients will feel better, and that's actually important. If you have a hormone deficiency and you feel lousy, it's really hard to go out there and build that fire. If we fix that, give you that catalyst, we can get things started. And now those 3 domains add up to 9 rather than 3. If I just fix your hormones, you might feel better, and that's a laudable goal, and we care about how our patients feel, but they're not really going to transform their health because they haven't built the fire. So it really goes in that order. You start with the nutrition, you compound it with exercise, the hormones come second. Unfortunately, out in the blogosphere, the idea is all about the hormones, that they're magic and they're going to, just fix everything and that's all you have to do. Certainly not true.
Is there any other kind of general disinformation that you're butting up against constantly as you coach and help people?
Well, I think particularly with nutrition, the biggest problem with the web and social influencers is that there's a lack of individual context to the information that's going out there. Yeah. So first, there's some information that's just flat out wrong. And it's very difficult for people to tell when they're on social media or on the web what's true and what's not, because there's no filter. Everything is kind of equal. And sometimes the thing that gets through is what's spoken the loudest. But even if it's true, a lot of times information lacks context to be applied to an individual, what we call the individual needs analysis. And so whenever we design a nutrition or exercise plan, it's specific to that individual based on things like their background, whether they have comorbidity, their desires, their preferences, and all that's factored in to create a plan to say, okay, I think this is a good plan for you. So while some information may be true, it doesn't apply to the context of the individual, and that's a big problem out there, and it's very difficult for people to navigate.
So what should we do about that? I mean, that's why I wanted you on the show, because I know that you're all about research and you're all about evidence-driven information, and you're not going to make a claim that's not supported by multiple resources to prove that that's true. So, for example, trainers now are taking on nutritional positions. They have zero clinical background. They have no master's degrees or anything else, but they're shredded because it worked for them and they're sharing it with their audiences. How could the general population navigate past those folks and get to people like you, or even myself for that matter, who actually have that experience?
Well, that's going to be difficult. At some level, you may say it would be better not even to try to get any information on social media. That being said, I think you have to. There are some people that are doing a good job. For instance, in terms of nutrition, there's a group that's called Precision Nutrition. They've got a lot of free content out there. They do some great education resources. They have a program not only for trainers that can go through. That's excellent. But they have a lot of free content that's out there for the individual. That's a great site for nutrition because they tend to have more of an agnostic approach, that there's no one single plan, that there's a variety of ways to eat healthy, and it's really trying to find one that a patient can actually execute. Because the only thing that predicts success in nutrition is compliance. Mm-hmm. It's not actually what you do. It's can you actually do it, and can you do it long term? So unfortunately, a lot of the focus is on arguing about macronutrient mixes, and I'm going to do keto, or no, I'll do paleo, or low carb, or low fat, or I'm going to go vegan, as if there is one dietary plan that we're all going to eat, or that there's only one right way. There isn't, and what we should really be looking at is different things like intermittent fasting or macronutrient mixes should be looked at as tools that can manipulate physiology to a desired end. And what we should try to find out is what tools can this particular patient use, what tools might be better designed for their particular individual problems, and that's the needs analysis, and then going out and saying, can we help you learn how to use these tools, get better, and then you've got a plan that you can sustain forever that will actually be effective.
Yeah, that's fascinating. One related topic is protein consumption, because we hear, of course, there's a jillion promoted protein products that are advertised all the time, and we hear we need protein, we have to have protein. But how much protein and the best sources for protein, I know, again, everything's individualized and going to be different from one person to the other. But are there some general guidelines, or you have some thoughts there, Dr. Lake?
In terms of protein content, generally you're going to be shooting for about 0.8 to 1.5 grams per kilogram. So that's going to put patients somewhere in, most adults in the range of 70 to maybe 150 grams of protein a day. Certain groups may want a little more. So if you've got a large male that's doing a lot of resistance training, they may go up to 2 grams per kilogram. But there's no one specific amount that people have. There is certainly a minimal amount, and I put that down at about 0.8. One of the reasons that we encourage protein, because protein is the macronutrient that best suppresses hunger. So we tend to encourage our patients who struggle with hunger as one of their problems to supplement, their meals with protein, or use a mid-afternoon or mid-morning snack with protein. The source of the protein, we're okay with animal protein, but one of the things when you talk about protein coming from an animal source, which actually has the best amino acid blend because we're animals also. So, when we eat beef, it's like us. When we eat a plant, that's amino acid mix is really more tailored to a plant. So there can be some deficiency. So we're okay with animal protein, but you have to understand that we don't eat macronutrients. We eat foods. So when I eat protein, then what else is coming along? And then you get in with other things like fat content, the type of fat, the number of calories are coming in. And so that's what you have to look at the individual and say, well, maybe animal protein is okay, but I need to avoid certain proteins that have a lot of saturated fat because that may drive up LDL cholesterol. And maybe in this particular patient, one of our goals is to lower LDL because they're at higher risk for heart disease. Someone else may not be as big a problem. Not only that, you have to then look at what other macronutrients, because fat in terms of its benefit or its risk is also determined by carbohydrate content. So you can't look at anything in isolation. One of the problems, and that's a big problem, I think, in nutrition, is this reductionist approach. People want to go down and say it's all about this one thing. And I would say for your audience out there, if there is a red flag, it is anything that says it's this thing. This is the one thing. This is the magic thing, like sugar is toxic, or saturated fat is bad, or animal protein's bad. That tells you right there to run away because it's not ever going to be just one thing. And I think the reason why you see that is because if I go out on the bandwagon and I'm going to make this the big boogeyman, I can sell a lot of books or CDs or have a lot of hits on my Twitter feed. That's really easy to do. But it's not sound science and it leads people astray. So that's the one thing I would avoid. And it's okay to drill down to one aspect of physiology, but then you have to step back and say, what does this mean in terms of the individual needs analysis? And then you can drill down again and get some information, but you step back and say, what does this mean in the entire context of this individual? And that's why we're all different. And that's why it makes it difficult for people to, go to one spot and say, oh, this is what's going to do the job.
Right.
That's why we need coaches like Jenn out there working hands-on. It is labor intensive. It is hands-on. It's chronic, and it's probably going to be expensive. But you can pay for it on the front end, or you can pay for it on the back end when you're, into the, the disease model.
Right.
Yeah, we don't want to get
That's our
there.
challenge.
Now, let's kind of stem on that point. I mean, people are saying that I don't eat animal protein because it causes cancer. We have a doctor out there who's saying don't eat beans because of the lectins and it could ultimately cause inflammation in the gut. So who in the world do we follow, and what plan should someone start if they're struggling with obesity? Like, what's the first step if they can't afford you or I, for example?
Well, the obesity epidemic is driven by caloric excess. Right there, that's flat out. The reason why people store excess body fat is because they're in positive energy balance. So I know it's not in vogue to talk about calories, but calories matter. And that's...
I'm laughing because I don't count calories, but I look at food logs, so I could tell.
But here's the thing: it's all about the equation of energy balance is energy storage, and actually it's the change in energy storage is equal to the change in energy intake minus the change in energy output. So when people have equal energy intake and output, they are going to be in energy balance and their mass will be stable, okay? If you're in positive energy intake, you will store that as mass. Now, if you're growing, when you're a child, you may store that as lean body mass, bone, you're growing. Doesn't necessarily mean you get fat. But for adults, pretty much when we're in positive energy balance, we store it as body fat. Now, body fat is a complex endocrine organ There are different types of fats. It matters whether your fat cells get big by expanding their size or whether you get fat by making more fat cells, which, by the way, you can do as an adult. The one is called hypertrophic obesity. The one's called hyperplastic obesity. Hypertrophic obesity, when you expand the size of a single fat cell, is much more pro-inflammatory than hyperplastic obesity. So when we look at somebody's body fat, we don't know that underlying, and that's why you see different metabolic profiles at different body fats. Also, where you store it. Subcutaneous fat is not as inflammatory as visceral fat. That's stored around your major organs, that around your blood vessels, perivascular fat, ectopic fat around the heart, pericardial. They're all different and they're all complex, which is why it's hard to talk about fat and obesity as just one thing. It's clearly not. But bottom line is, it's excess calories. And one of the problems is we just have access to all kinds of calorically dense foods. They taste real good. And so it's easy to get out of balance.
This is such awesome stuff, right? Because we're getting down to the meat of things with all this noise out there, right? So this is awesome. I have one more of these themes I'd like you to hit on, Dr. Leake. My drug of choice is caffeine. I love caffeine. So we live in a highly caffeinated society, right? In our mini marts now, right? There's a plethora of all these energy drinks that have become the big deal, right? And they compete against each other with how much caffeine they give you. And of course, our obsession with coffee in this country and around the world. And I want to know your take on caffeine and acceptable levels and how dangerous it is. That's something that, for me, I would like to know.
Caffeine is good energy aid. I mean, it works. It can improve our mental focus. You drink a cup of coffee before you take a test, you're going to do better. Before a workout, you're probably going to do better. The form that caffeine comes in, a lot of us commonly get it in coffee. Generally speaking, coffee seems to be kind of good for you. Again, in reasonable amounts, 2 to 4 cups per day, you're probably okay. Yeah. Once you get above a certain amount of caffeine, about 200 milligrams, you're probably not going to get much effect at 300 milligrams of caffeine, which a lot of people could consume, at Starbucks and whatever. You're probably only going to get side effects, a headache, maybe jittery. You're not going to really get much more energy after that. The other thing with caffeine is that habitual caffeine drinkers will start to get an attenuation of its effect. So some people actually will cycle caffeine in order to preserve that effect. Caffeine can interfere with your sleep. Even if you don't feel like, I can drink a cup of coffee late in the day and it doesn't, and I can still go to sleep, it can affect the quality of your sleep. So you want to make sure that you front load your caffeine earlier in the day just to enhance your sleep. Excessive amounts could raise your homocysteine levels. That's thought to be perhaps a risk for vascular problems. Again, we're talking about a whole lot of caffeine. It should be noticed also that coffee, depending on how it's brewed, can raise your cholesterol. And so the worst type of coffee for raising cholesterol is French press coffee. There are organic compounds in the coffee that can raise LDL cholesterol. The next worst would be Turkish coffee. Espresso is probably next on the list. And drip coffee doesn't raise your cholesterol much because the paper filter tends to take out these organic compounds. So, if you had a problem with your cholesterol and you're looking like, hey, could I be driving this? You could also look at the type of coffee you're drinking and how much, and you might, I've seen some pretty robust drops in cholesterol when we've got people off of French press coffee.
That's awesome.
What do you put them on instead?
Well, they can drink drip coffee.
Okay.
It's just a different type. And again, that's why you have to look at the individual. Not all of us are going to have a problem with something like this, but it could be a factor in somebody. And that's why teasing out these things, again, on an individual level is just needs hands-on input and why it's just one thing. So I could write a coffee, or an article talking about coffee raising LDL and scare everybody, and I might get a lot of hits and everything, but it would only apply probably to a small group of people. And then even in that group, we'd have to say, well, how much can they tolerate a rise in the LDLs? Because of other things, that may not be a big deal at all.
Now, I've gone to age management conferences, and it's very interesting because you see these physicians who are very thirsty for information in this field. And a lot of those folks actually need you, Dr. Leake. They'd be sleeping in the audience because they're exhausted for reasons of not being healthy. Yeah. So I guess my question to you is, where would you like to see that medical profession go? Like, how do people get better educated in your profession, and how do people navigate around people who claim to be experts but really have a long way to go with their information?
Well, it really needs to start in the medical schools. And in fact, my fellow that co-authored the textbook that we wrote several years ago on age management medicine, we actually tried to get certain medical schools interested. We said we would actually come down and maybe do a primer course, 6 to 8 weeks for free. Couldn't get them to bite on it at all, mainly because they look at someone like us and they go, what could you guys tell us about anything? It's unfortunate, but that's where it needs to be started. We even wanted to go in, we said we even do VO2 testing on a group of like your freshmen, and we'd follow them along, and we'd design little training programs and see if we could get some effect while, teaching them about aerobic exercise. Just wasn't interested, couldn't get a grant for it. And so I don't know what the answer is, because unfortunately, they are talking a little bit about nutrition and exercise, but they're going to these large epidemiologic studies that have flawed data in it, because they ask people, hey, what did you eat? And then 10 years later, they look at something and say, oh, you never changed what you eat, which is absurd. The other thing about most of those large studies, and they generate a lot of the information on nutritional approach, is about 66% of the information that's given in those is biologically implausible, because oftentimes when they count up the amount of calories that the people are supposedly eating, they say they're eating about 1,600 calories a day. And if they were doing that, we wouldn't have an obesity epidemic. Right. So it's not even plausible. Yet they go ahead and say, we're still going to base our recommendations on these flawed studies. We need to just stop. I think all nutritional epidemiology is pseudoscience. Of course, that filters a lot out into the web and everything. Study comes out, this amount of carbs is good. No, next week this is bad. Yeah. It's all pseudoscience. It can't be verified. It's one of the scientific tenets is you collect data and it can be independently verified. Yeah. The only one who knows what you ate is you, and you probably can't accurately even tell me what you ate. And we see this in the practice in our own patients. People have no real awareness of actually what they eat. Now, Jen mentioned food journaling, and that can be helpful if people actually write down every single morsel they eat. They can start to learn what they actually do eat, and they'll see they're in a lot of
Well, you know what I have people do? The first week of working with them, I have them actually take pictures of their food, because what they actually write down and what's actually in their plate are two different things.
Now, one of the other problems, one of the challenges with food journaling in patients is that there's always going to be what's called a Hawthorne effect. And a Hawthorne effect is the effect of observation that then changes what you're observing. So as soon as I tell my patients to food journal, all of a sudden they start eating better that week. I know what you ate last month, all the crap you ate. And so even when you try to do that, there can be problems in collecting that type of data. But with time, you can sort of get that, and taking pictures of the food, that's a great idea. That would be a way to really enhance at least the accuracy. So that's pretty clever.
I have one more. Can we do one more? I know we're running late. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, this is a common discussion all the time in my house and outside my house in the workplace. Ooh. Okay, what is the argument based on your research, sweeteners, sugar? Okay, if I'm gonna have a soda, regular Coke, Diet Coke.
Okay. So right there, I would say hands down Diet Coke, because a regular Coke has 10 teaspoons of sugar, and nobody really needs that amount of sugar. Now, that being said, certain individuals, again, the idea that sugar is inherently toxic is a falsehood. It's not. The reason why sugar tends to be harmful for most people is just the excess amount. And if we look at the amount of sugar that's consumed in this nation, it's been going up, and it does parallel the obesity epidemic. But it's not because there's anything specifically bad about sugar. It's just a form of carbohydrate. It is rapidly assimilated, so it can provoke an insulin response that may be problematic. But from a calorie standpoint, it's just calorically dense. And so that Diet Coke, quick 150 calories, boom, you can down that in seconds. And, if you do that several times a day, you're going to probably find yourself in caloric imbalance. Now, if you're a 18-year-old senior in high school doing 2-a-day football practices, you can probably drink that big mug in the middle at lunch, because you're going to burn it all off.
Right.
And it's not going to hurt your insulin sensitivity. But for, the average Joe who's getting the big gulp, with his hot dog, at the 7-Eleven for lunch while he's, out on the road doing sales, he's better off getting a Diet Coke.
No. Good discussion for the dinner table,
Oh my gosh,
George.
this is great. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, and we try to keep our episodes real low, but before we say goodbye to you, Dr. Lake, what are some takeaways that people can start enhancing their health with after listening to this episode?
Yeah, I would say one, whole foods. Mm-hmm. Try to eat whole foods. So, and some people say if it runs, flies, swims, grows out of the ground, drops from a tree, you can eat it. If it comes in a bag or a box, try not to eat it.
Yeah.
Move more. Just move. Move. Activity. Yeah. Get comfortable with being hungry. Too many people think that hunger is like the most awful thing that happens to them. I mean, it's natural to be hungry at times. It's okay. We shouldn't die of being hungry. And get comfortable with being hungry. Some people have a phrase they call it surf the urge. Learn how to be hungry. That's one of the great things about intermittent fasting. If you do that type of approach, you can start to get comfortable with being hungry and realize that often it passes and it's transient, and that you don't have to indulge every time you feel a little bit of a hunger pain. Those would, and then learn what a proper portion size is.
Yeah.
So quickly for protein, it would be size and thickness of your palm.
Yeah.
Okay. For a vegetable, size of your fist. For a carbohydrate like a rice or a potato, what could fit in the cup of your hand. And for healthy fat, length of your thumb. Guys get 2, women get 1.
That's not fair.
It's good to be a guy.
That's awesome. Thank you, Dr. Lake. No, that is, what an amazing amount of valuable information did we just sort out for people. This is awesome.
Yeah.
Do you have one more minute?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. What I think one of the problems that the people have when they embark on going out to try to, execute a health plan, an eating plan, an exercise plan, is they focus too much on outcome. What's going to happen? I'm going to lose X amount of weight, or my blood sugar is going to change, or my bench press is going up. And the problem with outcome, at least for a long-term program, is all outcomes go to equilibrium. Eventually, you're not going to lose any more weight. Your blood work isn't going to change. Your bench press isn't going to go up. But the costs of adherence to your program still stay fixed. And all of our behavior is driven by a cost-benefit analysis. Okay, that's what we go, cost-benefit. I'm going to do this. Cost-benefit, I'm not going to do this. Well, if you're outcome-oriented, all of a sudden your outcome goes to 0, but your costs are still fixed. And so that's a very unfavorable cost-benefit analysis, and it's why people are already abandoning the habits that got them there at the peak of their success. Because when I'm outcome-oriented, the only way I can rebalance that is decrease the cost of adherence. So here comes my cheats. And then all of a sudden, boom, I'm back to where I want. So what I try to get people to focus on is performance. Here's our plan. How well can I perform it today? And my goal is only on what's right in front of me. I want to unlink all my decisions, what I'm going to eat, breakfast, lunch, dinner, from one another in isolation. And my goal is just to go out and do the best job I can right now. Then I'll go on and I'll do the next one. So what I ate for breakfast has no impact on what I'm doing for lunch. Didn't matter if I exercised or not, and going to affect dinner. Just what's right in front of me. And I just want to try to perform the best that I can. And the other thing is, hopefully I can get you to believe that when you perform well, you feel successful. You're happy.
Yeah.
Now the reward becomes intrinsic to the behavior we're trying to replicate. And that's self-perpetuating for a lifetime. So it's kind of just, a lot of it is kind of just believing that I eat and exercise in a certain way because it's just the right thing to do. And when I do it, it makes me happy. Outcomes aside. Now, if you do that pretty well, you're probably going to have some pretty decent
I'm so glad you brought that up. And actually, we could do a whole episode just on intrinsic motivation. Because seriously, there's nothing more awesome than following something that's inside of you versus looking at a scale. That gets old after a while. And like you said, you plateau, and then therefore your performance in your mind is
and actually, even when you start to get to a certain age, which 64, I'm there now, some of these outcomes, even if you're doing a really good job, start to go down. I mean, your VO2 goes down a little bit.
Are you still shredded, though?
For about 12%.
That's not bad.
It's not bad, but it's getting harder and harder. Every year, I've got to do a little better job. My tolerance for little flaws in my nutrition goes down, you know, and then you get injuries. You know, I broke my hip in the fall, so had to get over that. It's what riding horses does for me.
Well, listen, Dr. Leake, you've been a wealth of knowledge, and it's been such an honor having you. We're probably going to have to bring him back on at some point.
Yeah, we got to. There's a lot more to dig down in.
Right.
This is
I'd
wonderful.
love to come back. I really had fun. I hope I was
fabulous.
helpful.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Leake. Loved
Absolutely awesome.
Okay.
So
well, take care.
Yes, you too. Thank you for tuning in, ladies and gentlemen. We have our next episode is going to be episode 27, and we have a surprise for you on what that episode is going to be. So now you have to actually tune in to figure out what it is. We love surprises because him and I behind the scenes, man. Oh yeah, magic happens with that stuff. So we definitely want you to let us know if you have any particular show suggestions by visiting us at fitbecause.com. And again, we want to thank Dr. Leake for coming on for this amazing episode. Thank you again, sir, and keep doing the great work you do. This has been Fit Because, hosted by Jennifer Zerling
and George Veater. Be sure to follow us on social media at Fit Because Show on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook.
And for past episodes, be sure to visit our website at fitbecause.com.
Also, please subscribe to our show on iTunes and be sure to rate and comment. You may always request topics for our subsequent episodes.
And if you love this episode, please share it with someone you love so that we can continue spreading our mission to help people be fit.
Until next time, take care of yourself and know that your future is
Fit Because.